Hello and welcome to Betfair's AFL season preview for 2024. Boy, what an exciting time of year it is. We're about to get stuck into the AFL 0 round one. That's the first edition of that. But I'm joined by Daz and Tommy, Betfair analysts. We worked very hard on a very in-depth season preview, but surely you guys are ready for a big 2024. Tommy, ready to see North have another crack at it this year?
Certainly, Carl. Yeah, more excitement around the traps this year with more young players for North in the door. But on a more broader note, I think this is one of the most even seasons, certainly in recent memory. So looking forward to getting stuck into it. And yeah, footy is on our doorstep. So,
I 100% agree with that. Tommy, I reckon it's a very even season. What do you think, Daz?
Yeah, there were a lot of sides that finished last year so well. Keen to see how they go. Carlton, GWS and Sydney in particular. And then you look at sides that were a bit underwhelming, like a Geelong or a Western Bulldogs, Fremantle. How do they respond? And yeah, who's the leader of the pack chasing Collingwood? Is it still Brisbane? Will it be Port Adelaide? Can Melbourne go again with all of the controversies, but also the retirement of Brayshaw? So it'll be a fascinating watch.
Well, looking forward to getting stuck into these season previews. What we're going to do is we're going to go through every single club and have a little bit of a chat about who some of the players we should be looking out for and maybe some potential betting strategies for those clubs. And in alphabetical order, we're going to start off with Adelaide, who arguably were robbed of a finals berth last year. They were absolutely fantastic. They had their patches, but probably should have snuck in there in the end. They finished the season with 11 wins, 12 losses, finished 10th on the ladder there. They didn't bring in anyone to help their side. Obviously, just Chris Burgess, which was a trade from the Gold Coast. Daniel Curtin was their number one pick. Who wants to start off with Adelaide? Does? How do you think the Crows are going to do this season?
Yeah, as it turned out, that Sydney game, had they have won that match, it would have flipped positions in the 8. So it did turn out that way for them. But for Adelaide, a lot of close losses last year and struggled a little bit on the road. Terrific at home, 8-4 at home, 3-8 on the road, but they lost 5 times by less than 7 points, including by 1 and 2 points to Collingwood. So if you look at that, it suggests they're competitive in enough games that marginal improvement would see them go pretty close to playing finals.
I think important to note that Matthew Nix, senior coach, of course, of Adelaide, is in his 5th season heading into 2024 and I believe out of contract as well. So it'd be interesting, maybe some pressure associated with his job. And if the Crows get off to a fast start, well, then he might get re-signed. But if they don't, then we know that what can happen with under pressure coaches. So in a 2-team town, there's always a lot of pressure, and particularly on Adelaide, arguably the bigger clubs. So yeah, be interested to see, Carl, how the young Crows go in 2024.
As you say, Tommy, that's a great point. I mean, they're very young. Obviously, Max Michelini had a great season last year. We spoke about him on Trade Talk. I really like the season of Mitch Hinge as well. Got another one into Rochelle. Darcy Fogarty looks like one that's probably going to stand out again in the forward line. We always say that Tex Walker is probably going to slow down, but he shows us quite the contrary. He almost won the Coleman last year from Charlie Curnow, had a couple of massive games, but any players to watch out for, Daz?
Yeah, career best season for Tex. It's whether they can get something like that from him again. You mentioned Fogarty, amazing kick for goal, just beautifully accurate kick for goal. And
he's probably the best in the league.
I'd say so. And then Isaac Rankin, who's a mercurial player and a match winner, 36 goals last year. But it's whether he can obviously turn the highlights aspect into being a really consistent, good player for the Adelaide Crows each and every week amongst, say, the best 3 on their list.
I think it's important to note also that the Crows announced their leadership group during the week and sort of raised my eyebrows a bit that Rankin wasn't in the leadership group. Given he's now in his probably 5th season, you'd expect him at a new club to have probably be in that group, given how young it is, in the leadership group that is. So it'd be interesting to see if he can maintain that level of form.
Having a look now, they're currently $1.73 on the Betfair Exchange for the top 8. Are there any other potential angles that we want to look at in terms of betting on the Crows?
Not a betting strategy as such, Carl, but I think just a quick mention for Daniel Curtin, who was their number one pick first round draft pick in 2023, and he's sort of a really exciting hybrid prospect played centre half back last year, but I think they want him to be a midfielder. So it'd be interesting to see if he can do any damage in 2024.
Perfect. Well, Harry Stanley has earmarked a potential betting strategy on our season previews page on the Hub. Adelaide to defeat Gold Coast in round one at $2.16. It's a pretty good price there. All right, let's move over to the Brisbane Lions, the grand finalists of last year. One of my favourite grand finals in recent memory. That was an absolutely cracking game against Collingwood on the last Saturday of September. Some massive list additions, and I think it's going to bode really well from them. Tom Doedee from Adelaide is a massive one in defence. Tommy, what do you think about Brisbane's chances again this year? Are they the team to beat potentially?
I think so, Carl. Yeah, very, very dominant at home at the Gabba. Did they lose one or maybe no games last year? So, yeah, that's an incredible feat from them. And I think in 2024 they have relatively the same team on paper, and with natural improvement from young players. They'll get Ashcroft back, of course, who it's easy to forget that Will was injured at about the midway point of last season, did his ACL, so he'll return this year. And yeah, how exciting players like Kitty Coleman, who lit up the G on grand final day, and he will be one to watch again this year. Daz, did you have any thoughts on potentially, actually, their departures? I think are one to discuss, because Marcus Adams, a very solid player, players like Jack Gunston and Daniel Rich, veteran, experienced heads. Potentially they might lose something on that front, but Brisbane, there's such a sort of never-ending factory of young talent there that I think they'll be able to fill the void.
Yeah, I'm not sure the losses will hurt them too much. Marcus Adams maybe. Obviously got injured a bit late last year, but Tom Doedee is a replacement in that space. Jack Gunston, that was an unsuccessful transition with him going to Brisbane, now back to Hawthorn, and Daniel Rich didn't play all that much last year, and the likes of Coleman have moved into that role anyway. So I think they'll be okay in terms of those list changes. And I think the positives for them is that they do have a couple of those players coming through, not just Ashcroft, but Darcy Wilmot went from playing 3 games in his debut year to playing all 26. He ranks 6th at Brisbane for disposals, 3rd for rebounds, top 10 for marks, and was actually a late mover in the Rising Star calculations last year. Jasper Fletcher, the son of former Brisbane, we played for 4 or 5 clubs, but son of Adrian Fletcher, and I think there's enough of that there that even if, say, a Zorko or a player like that slipped away a touch, that they can win enough games. I guess the key for them is they were 12-0 at the Gabba, and then 5-6 outside of the Gabba, and lost all of their MCG matches. So that's still an Achilles heel. They haven't necessarily played badly at the MCG. They just find ways to lose, and obviously the grand final, I think most things actually went right for them, and they still got beaten on the day. So and probably just one to mention would be Oscar McInerney, 845 hit-outs, 9th in the Western Fairest. I think if he could elevate into the top 5 or 6 ruckman in the comp, that might be enough for them.
I think there was a game early on last year, might have been round 4 or 5, where they travelled down to Melbourne and played the D's at the G, and from memory they were up by probably 20 plus points in the last quarter and got overrun. So they can play well there, but just the winning, I suppose, getting over the line is still an issue for them in Melbourne.
So many positives around Brisbane. I definitely think that they're the team to beat. I think losing Marcus Adams is a bit of a sore spot for them, but at the same time, he had his injury issues. They bring in Tom Doedee. I think he's an underrated defender when he's on the park. He was great for Adelaide, but also had his injury issues. Jack Payne, just solid. I think what I like about Brisbane is they've got a really good mix of top talent, and then also workhorses, the ones that will just do their role. And as we mentioned before, players like Jasper Fletcher, Zach Bailey continues to progress. Cam Rayner continues to progress.
Just a quick one on Cam Rayner, guys. I know that he's much spoken about player, number 1 draft pick from a number of years ago. I think it's fair to say hasn't lived up to the hype or the tag of a number 1 pick. But Do you think he has that ability to go to another level, or do you think sort of what we're seeing is what we're going to get for his career at the moment?
Probably needs to be able to spend more time in the middle. I mean, he's a very good small to medium forward, but small to medium forwards, unless they're Toby Green, aren't going to be a number one draft pick. Generally, you probably want a few more strings to his bow, and did finish top 5 in the BNF, so they must rate him internally. But yeah, I think they probably need a little bit more from him to bridge that gap for mine.
For me, he's an X-factor player, and I think the forward, small forward, and then move up the ground into the midfield position is perfect for him. For him internally, they obviously rate him highly, and I think he has the ability to change games on his head. So while he might not be doing that consistently, I think a player of his caliber is always very, very handy, especially in a team like Brisbane's, where if you have that X factor player, you can potentially win games off the back of those performances. But let's move on to the Blues, and a lot of pundits have obviously had a look at Carlton and said that they should be premiership favourites. The Betfair Exchange doesn't agree with that. I'll start with Daz first. Anything in terms of Carlton potentially taking the next step? Where do you think Carlton needs to push?
Yeah, I think they tick most boxes. They've got 2 Coleman medalists on their list, which is incredibly rare. You probably compare that only with Geelong when they had Hawkins, or with Hawkins and Cameron on their list, 2 players that could potentially do that. Charlie Curnow's the best key forward in the game. Harry Mackay struggled a bit last year, but can certainly play. They've got Wiedering in defence, who's one of the best key position defenders in the competition, and clearly their top-end midfield talent is amongst the best in the comp, with Cripps, and then obviously Walsh and Chera and these sorts of players, and the support cast they have around that with Akers and those types of players. So I think they tick most boxes, and in the second half of the year they beat Collingwood, they beat St Kilda, they beat Melbourne twice, they beat Port Adelaide, so they beat a lot of other finals teams in that run towards the end. So you still look at what they did in the first half of the year and think, well, what exactly happened there, and are they prone to that level of inconsistency? But I think as a profile, they tick most boxes for mine to be a pretty good side.
How do you think Carlton are going to go, Tommy?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Carl. I think they'll be right up there again this year. I think I have them making the top 4, but I suppose just two comments about the way they play. The first thing is outside run in the midfield. I think up forward in the back line and sort of their contested midfield is a real strength of theirs, but the outside run for me is a little bit of a concern. Should they go up to the Gabba, or should they play Sydney, for example? I think that could sort of pose a bit of a problem there. But I'll throw to you, Carl. So Orazio Fantasia, a bit of an enigma, had an interesting career with Essendon to start with, and then went to Port with a bit of a, I suppose, hype on him. You've put in your preview that you think he's going to have a big year. What do you think he'll provide?
So I think Orazio is a very talented player, and his stats and metrics in the games that he actually plays support that theory. I think he kicked 29 plus goals in his first year at Port Adelaide, and that was one of the best seasons he put together. Obviously, got onto the park, which is the main one. But for Carlton, I think a massive issue, you say it's a bit of that outside run, but for me, I think it's that small forward presence. We have seen a lot of development out of Jesse Motlop. Corey Durden was a little bit unlucky last year with a few different tissue injuries and the like. You know what you're going to get out of Matt Owies. He's a real heart and soul player, but is he that player that's going to be in your best 22 on grand final day?
Can he kick goals as well as another thing?
He does get the team up and about. Look, I think really it's about getting more depth into that position, and Fantasia may be that player that salutes in a spot in that best 22, but it could be another player. I like the pressure, and I think it brings us to the point of Carlton's depth has never been this good. It hasn't been this good in the last 15 years. Obviously, depth is very, very important, but we could see players like Matt Kennedy, Ollie Hollands, Caleb Marchbank, Elijah Hollands, George Hewitt, Jordan Boyd, Matt Owies, Orazio Fantasia. These are all players that really need to put up their hand and say, I'm in the best 22. I need to help Carlton get to that next level. seemingly after a preliminary final year, the next level is making a grand final and hopefully winning it for Carlton supporters. But just to quickly touch on a couple of players I think are going to have a breakout year. Arguably, Oliver Hollands was one that could have had a breakout year last year, but I think he's one that's going to jump to the next level. Tommy, as you said, a bit of an issue potentially could be outside run. I know that we've got players like Doherty maybe spending a little bit more inside. Zach Williams is obviously going to return. He's going to be great for Carlton. But Ollie Hollands is one. His running capacity is just incredible. One of the best in the AFL. Certainly loves to run. He's a heart and soul player as well. I think the attitude to want to win the football.
Yep.
We saw him run back into plenty of packs. So that's the kind of stuff that you love seeing in a player. So looking forward to
and of
to
course
him.
His brother Elijah joins from the Suns. He was a high draft pick, I think 3 years ago now, but much again highly touted and
been through some challenges, obviously.
Has been through some challenges, but yeah, he's another one who can add to that outside run. He can kick a goal as well if he plays forward. So it'd be interesting to see. I think a bit of stability for Carlton's not a bad thing. They didn't add any off-season. They didn't have any off-season acquisitions apart from Elijah Hollands. So going to 2024 with the same sort of list. And I think that'll work for them this year.
Yeah, I'd argue they don't have a weakness. Even if the small forwards could be stronger, they could certainly bolster that. But yeah, we even mentioned run and carry off half back with Sard and Doherty and those types of players. They've got that box covered as well. So
to finish up our preview of the Blues, let's talk about a couple of betting strategies. I think there's a few really good trading options for Carlton in the 2024 season. Harry Mackay is one of them for the Coleman medal. I think for a Coleman medalist to be $30+ on the exchange, I think he hit a height of $32 is far too much over the odds.
Just whether he can kick straight, that's huge. That's a huge issue for Harry. We know that even 10 metres out straight in front is no sure thing for Harry. So I think
the important thing for Harry is that he is a player that goes into his off season and really works on where he can improve, and he did that prior to winning the Coleman medal in 2019, I think it was. So he had some kicking issues then. He went back and fixed them and then won the Coleman medal. I don't think Harry Mackay is going to win the Coleman medal, but 30+ is way too long odds. And I think a potential bag in the first or second round of 5 goals will have him in Coleman betting at something around $10, maybe even single figures where you can lay anything below that.
I know he and Jack Higgins are very different players, but I think they both get
Jack
caught.
Martin.
No, Jack Higgins. St Kilda Jack Higgins. I reckon they both get caught in the do I snap or do I set shot mode, and they often make an absolute mess of it. Whereas it's almost like you've got to throw one of them away and say it's drop punts all the way through. Focus on that aspect of your technique. No around the bodies. Doesn't matter where you are on the ground. Even if you're on the boundary line, just kick a drop punt. And just eliminate one side of that out of the game and focus on the other.
Yep. The only last quick betting strategy is for the minor premiership. Carlton are currently $14.50 on the exchange. I think that's way over the odds for a team that's potentially contending for a premiership, as everyone would say. I mean,
you're keen on them this year, eh?
I think the market doesn't quite have them right. I mean,
the men from Lygon Street, you reckon they're the drought breakers?
Well, I think that in premiership markets, Carlton are currently 4th in betting at $10, but to win the minor premiership, I think they're 6th in betting. They don't really match up, so I think there's a little bit of value in the minor premiership.
It is remarkably the second longest premiership drought active in the competition at the moment.
Crazy.
And it's 1995, so it's not even that long ago.
Well, it doesn't feel like that long ago, but we're getting older, Dats. Let's go into the premiers of last season. Collingwood, they've said goodbye to Taylor Adams and a couple of others, Jack Ginnivan as well. But I'm not sure that they're going to make too much of an impact in terms of Collingwood obviously not going too well, but they've said hello to Lachie Schultz, and he's a player that I really, really rate, obviously over from Fremantle. Daz, what do you think of Collingwood this year?
Yeah, I reckon that's an excellent acquisition. I mean, Ginnivan's played some good football for them, but I think Schultz is certainly an upgrade in that space when you factor in, Bobby Hill's final series and ultimately grand final. To have that combination down there, and Schultz can push up the ground and get a bit of the footy as well. So I think that certainly helps them. And look, Taylor Adams has been a very good player and will be at Sydney, but I'm not sure their list comes out of that worse off. I think
I think
DiMatteo, who they took pick 25, is a pretty handy prospect too.
I think just on Taylor Adams, it sort of goes to show the Pies machine, the wheel keeps turning, because he was obviously missed the finals campaign last year, the grand final, with injury, but they were able to still win, and I think they've sort of shipped him out at a good time, because as you say, I don't think he would have added that much this season, and they've got youngsters coming through as well in that position, so I think they'll be all good in that.
I think in terms of breakout players, I mean, we talk about Lachie Schultz. He's certainly made an impression on the AFL already, probably underrated. But in terms of breaking out, I think he could turn into that sort of all-Australian caliber player. If he's kicking 40 plus as that small medium forward, I think he definitely fits the mould of an all-Australian.
Sort of similar to Jamie Elliott in his heyday in many respects. Not that Elliott is finished by any means, but just peak Jamie Elliott, Lachie Schultz reminds me of him a bit. So
now, while I think Collingwood are one of the teams to beat and one of the key contenders for 2024, let's talk about a couple of potential issues that we have with their side. I find their forward line potentially problematic, given Dan McStay is injured for the whole year, and there is a big reliance on Brody Myercheck. If Brody Myercheck gets injured, I'm not sure there's anyone really that can step up into that position. Obviously, Billy Frampton is a premiership player. Mason Cox is a premiership player, but are they ones that can lead that Collingwood forward line? What do you think, Daz?
Yeah, they've found a way to score for the last couple of years with small leading players. Elliott, De Goey goes forward, Myercheck, Bobby Hill that we mentioned. You'll throw Schultz into the mix. Will Hoskin-Elliott's played that role as well. That they just seem to find ways to adapt to what they have. But obviously you still want the get-out-of-jail ability to kick it long to a contest and have someone split the pack and create those smalls. So if they have an Achilles heel, it's that. Obviously they want a premiership anyway, so it's not a huge weakness for them. But yeah, if they had a 40-goal key position forward, then I think they'd clearly be the standout side to beat in the competition. They may well be anyway, but yeah, if there is a weakness, it's that.
And Myercheck has just been incredible. He kicked 40 plus last season and is pretty underrated in that fact. No teams really rate him, but he really gets up the ground and is a presence and just does what Collingwood needs him to do to function and win in that forward line. What do you think, Tommy?
I think, just a note from me, I think 5 of their key players are over 30 this year, and there's still a heavy reliance on those players. So Jeremy Howe, Tom Mitchell, Steele Sidebottom, Scott Pendlebury, and there's one more that escapes me, but I think they're all really
Jamie
critical.
Elliott, I think, is over 30.
Jamie Elliott's one as well.
Will Hoskin-Elliott will probably be.
Will Hoskin-Elliott's 30 as well. So there's just a bunch of names we've mentioned, and they're all key best 22 players for the Pies who at some point will experience a drop-off, and when they do, I think that'll coincide with a dip from the Pies. Probably not in 2024 because they're sort of early 30s, but one to watch certainly going forward.
The premiership hangover, is it real, Daz?
No, I don't think necessarily. Not for them. If it was a side, I'd look at a Brisbane who have been top 4 for 6 years. I think if they had a nailed one, there'd be a chance that it was job done short term and maybe for the first month. But with this Collingwood side, I don't think so. I still think there's enough young players there that there's a bit of hunger to keep succeeding.
I mean, the question will be evident, and we'll find out whether there is a hangover pretty early in the season. Look, for me, I'm laying Collingwood for top 4. I just think they're far too short. I think at around the $1.50 mark with 24 rounds to play, I think that, they're far too short. Potentially anything, if they lose those couple of games and early in the season and drift because of bad form, they've got a little bit of that hangover, they're trying to get back into it. Also I think they're very reliant on those keys up forward if something happens. Look, AFL is a really interesting thing. Markets are a really interesting thing. We can see that price drift very, very quickly. So at $1.50, I just simply can't have them for top 4 with 24 rounds to play in the season.
Giants away in the first game, Brisbane away in round 4, so a couple of tricky ones to start, and then their other 2 matches earlier finalists, Sydney and St Kilda. So maybe in that first month, if they're 2-2 or 1-3 potentially, then you start getting value on them to back again with the trade for top 4.
Any other notes on Collingwood?
I think we've covered off the pies pretty well. Certainly, I think for me, they're the ones to beat still in 2024. I have them, no genius, no Albert Einstein here, but I've definitely got them in the top 4, and likely making back-to-back grand finals.
Yep.
So.
Likeable Tommy. All right, let's talk about Essendon. I think Essendon are a very intriguing team in the AFL and a great one to talk about. They've had some of the biggest list additions of any AFL team. Obviously, Xavier Dersma from Port Adelaide. They say hello to Todd Goldstein, obviously from North Melbourne, and Jay Gresham from St Kilda. Ben Mackay, obviously, is the other one that they picked up as a free agent. So some pretty handy players. But what are we going to do with Essendon this year, Tommy?
Really interesting, Carl. I think the Bombers are under Brad Scott. I think have talked a big game this pre-season. I think Scott's been quoted on numerous occasions as saying that there's a new standard set at Windy Hill this year. There's going to be tougher on the players on pre-season and training standards and the like. So I think whether that manifests itself into a finals appearance and further to that a finals win or drought-breaking finals win remains to be seen. But yeah, the talent now, they are right in the sweet spot. You cannot deny that. And it'll be interesting to see if they can just shake that tag, the non-winners in finals tag, which is a big one.
I've got a question about Todd Goldstein. Do you think that he chose the right club to go to in the off-season? Obviously, they've got Sam Draper, who is easily their number 1 ruck. Can they play in the same team? What do you think?
I think Todd will be there as more of a mentor to Nick Bryan and Sam Draper. I think he'll play the odd game, but I don't think he'll be a mainstay in their 22, just purely because those other 2 rucks are sort of coming through the ranks and are very talented. So I think he'll be almost a pseudo sort of line coach in a way, I think.
That's an interesting one. Daz, what are you doing with Essendon this season?
It's interesting. They looked a lock for finals at about round 17 last year, then lost to Geelong by 77, lost to the Giants by 126, the Bulldogs by 41, Collingwood by 70. In their 2 wins, they beat West Coast by a point and North Melbourne by 9. So they really limped to the line over that last 6 weeks. Before that, very good. So it's just whether they can, build the fitness base or find ways to run the season out. I think their list should improve, but percentage tells you a little bit about a side as well. They had the 4th worst percentage in the competition last year. So I think Essendon are a chance to move into the 8, but whether they improve more than, say, Gold Coast, Adelaide, Bulldogs, Geelong bouncing back, and then whether they can surpass Sydney, St Kilda, Melbourne, whoever they need to go past, I'm not totally convinced on that. So I think they're a chance to make the 8, but I wouldn't have them right now in my top 8.
Yeah, they're very interesting. I like some of their players. I really like Dersma from Port Adelaide. Obviously has had his injury issues, but they got young players like Ben Hobbs continues to get better with every game he plays. Archie Perkins continues to get better.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Wright obviously was injured for a lot of last season, but when he came on, he was really
winner from a couple of years ago.
He was really on. Peter Wright, obviously 2 metre Peter, a great player. I think the acquisition of Ben Mackay really is a big one for Essendon, purely because they can release Jordan Ridley a little bit. I think if he plays that third tall, it's going to bode a lot better for the way Essendon move the ball forward. And he's an absolutely fantastic kick of the foot, Jordan Ridley. So any other players that we want to look out for, Tommy?
Yeah, big one for me. Big watch on Sam Durham this season. Kicked the winner against the Tigers last year. I believe it was the Dreamtime game. But further to that, I just think his ability to run and carry the footy is really impressive, and he's dominated the pre-season. We love players who dominate in the pre-season, but he's won both Essendon's 2K time trials, and I think he's been training with the midfield group almost exclusively over the summer. So expect a big season from him, and he ranked elite for marks actually in 2023. So just that dash off halfback and the run and gun style that Brad Scott and Essendon like to play, I think he'll figure very prominently in 2024.
Currently $3.15 on the Betfair Exchange for top 8. It's a pretty handy price. What do you do with that, Daz?
Yeah, look, I mean, I know before I said that I'm not sure that they would necessarily be my pick to make it, but if you compare them with Geelong 208, Gold Coast 250, Adelaide $1.70,
even Port 150.
The price is somewhat appealing. I haven't got them in there, but they are a chance, and I would say they're an equal chance with some of those sides. Certainly Geelong and Gold Coast.
I've said back them at if they reach 350. I think that's a price to back them at. Yeah. I think what price did you say they were at the moment?
$3.15.
Yeah, I think that's a bit too short. So if they drift to 350, I think that's backable. And but yeah, given it's the Bombers we're talking about, it might be tough, but 350 is a good price, I think.
All right, let's move on to Fremantle, the Fremantle Dockers. They're such an interesting team as well, a really weird one. They had their patches last year, and obviously the players went to Justin Longmuir and said, no, we don't like playing this way. You're making it too complicated. Let's change it up, simplify it. They got onto a couple of wins, but it certainly wasn't a consistent season from them, very up and down. They haven't really done anything with their list this year, and they've lost a couple of players. Natural progression is one thing. Obviously, they saw Caleb Sarong was amazing last season. Brayshaw continues to be the leader that they need. Luke Jackson, did they get enough out of him? There's so many talking points, but Fremantle, what are we going to do with them this season, Daz?
Yeah, unfortunately, they just haven't been able to stop that revolving door in recent years. When they lost Chera, they lost Blake Acres, they lost Rory Lobb, obviously Lockie Schultz moving on as well. And they just haven't quite been able to bolster to exactly the same extent that they would have liked. Obviously, with Luke Jackson coming in last year, that was highly sought after. It depends whether we see the Fremantle of 2022 or the Fremantle of 2023. Can they recapture that 2022 side that finished top 6, won a final, pushed Collingwood in a semi? I'm not absolutely convinced that they'll do that. I think there's enough young talent there. Jai Amos, I think, is one of the better prospects in the competition in that space. And I think they'll get really good service out of him. Really like Fredericks as a player. And yes, Sarong, Brayshaw, Luke Ryan, another very good player. But yeah, I think their depth maybe not quite as strong as some of those sides around them.
Yeah, speaking about under pressure coaches, we mentioned Matthew Nicks off the top. Well, you'd have to say Justin Longmuir. It's a whole different level. He is probably the most under pressure coach heading into this season, and if they can't get some wins on the board early, Carl, I think he will. Yeah, he'll struggle to maybe. And we don't wish coaches to be sacked, but I think if they are poor early in the season, he might struggle to make it to the bye. So, Carl, just one for you. So Matthew Johnson is a good player. A good young player, and a big midfielder. Do you think anyone else who you think will have a sort of breakout or standout season for the Dockers?
I think Matthew Johnson is a great call, Tommy. He's noted in the season previews a player that continued to improve as the season went on, and I love seeing young players late in the season, have a real crack and increase their disposals and output, and I think that's a really good indicator as to them potentially improving the next season. Same with teams in that area. Really, there isn't a stack of key young talent at Freo, which I think is a bit of an issue. They've still got to put a lot of development into a couple of their players, but the biggest one that they have is Jai Amos. He had his breakout season in his first full year of AFL football last season. He kicked 40 plus goals, and I think that's quite incredible. I wonder whether Matt Taberner getting back into that side will help him and his development a little bit. But
Josh Tracy's another one.
Josh Tracy is another young one, probably keeping Taberner out of the side right now. Really, really interesting to see what we will do with Fremantle. For me, I think Andrew Brayshaw, Luke Ryan performing at their best, obviously getting some more development into their younger players, Matthew Johnson, Hayden Young, Michael Frederick, Jai Amiss, are all really key, but I can't see them making the top 8 again. And I certainly wouldn't want to back them at the price that they are now. We'll see what happens. What do you guys think?
I'm in full agreement there. I think, as you mentioned, their top-end talent is elite, and some of their young guys have the potential too, but just that middle rung of players, the pressure, I think, just on the club as a whole may tell this season. I don't have them making the 8. Daz, what do you reckon?
No, I don't think so either. I think Caleb Sarong could certainly be in your calculations around Brownlows and top 3s and top 5s and that type of stuff. But if I was going to play around with Fremantle, I'd be looking at that type of thing.
All right, let's talk about the Geelong Cats now. They finally missed the 8. They only had 10 wins last season, but they got some important games into some young players. Any breakout players for you this season, Daz?
Potentially. Mitch Nevitt showed a good solid block, played 8 games last year, looked okay in those matches. Tanner Bruin, one of their recruits from 12 months ago, he averaged 19 disposals a game in the last 9 matches of the season. And when you look at Geelong's midfield and trying to give a few more guys opportunities, there's already reports that Tom Stewart will push into there, but no Isaac Smith. Cam Guthrie, I think, went down in their practice match last week, so there's a chance early for some players there. So yeah, I'd be looking at a couple of those players like a Tanner Bruin or a Mitch Nevitt potentially.
I think their midfield's a real worry, Carl. I think with Dangerfield sort of leading the charge in there alongside youngster Jai Clark is one to watch out for. You mentioned breakout players. It's quite a thin midfield on paper. But yeah, just a remarkable stat about Geelong. Chris Scott, 14 years senior coach of Geelong, just the first time in 2023 that he had a losing record. So it's pretty incredible.
And only the second time he's missed the final.
Yeah, correct. So I think just sort of a changing of the guard at Geelong, you'd probably say Tom Hawkins, this will be his last season. What a fantastic career, just phenomenal player for a long time. Dangerfield's another one who you touch and go whether this is his last season. So there are a number of players who you'd think are coming to the end, and the jury's probably out on their youth. So I think Geelong, in terms of a finals candidate, they'll win games this season. They'll have a few upset wins, and Cardinia Park, as we know, is a fortress. But I think as you've put here, Daz, I think laying them for the top 8 at $2 or even money thereabouts, I think that's really short. I think that's a great lay.
Yeah, the price indicates a historical trust in Geelong, which is totally understandable. They've been so consistent and so good, and you always expect that they'll make the right decisions to make their list as competitive as it possibly can be, and they'll win games when they shouldn't, and they'll fight on. And I understand why that price would be put up, but I think it would be a little bit of an indictment on some of the sides around them if they don't hold them off this year. Credit to Geelong if they can do that, but if you're an Adelaide or a Bulldogs or a Gold Coast or
Bombers
or an Essendon or a St Kilda,
yeah,
I think you would anticipate that you should finish higher than Geelong.
One thing about Geelong is when they play other teams, I mean, probably because they've been so good for so long, is that they really get headhunted. When you go into playing Geelong, I think teams really are like, oh, we have to step up and beat Geelong because they've been so good for so long. But let's talk about the Gold Coast. I think this, straight off the top, could be the year that Gold Coast play finals for the first time. They improved last year. I think the fact that they've got Damien Hardwick coaching at the helm. I didn't have a massive issue with Stuart Dew, but I think the fact that Damien Hardwick is in the chair now, it could progress them really quickly just from a mental point of view. What do you think, Tommy?
Play devil's advocate with you here, Carl. I think Damien Hardwick, I think he's a great appointment. There's no doubt about that. His record speaks for itself at the Tigers, 3-time premiership coach. But I just wonder, is there a danger? And I've written almost word for word in my preview here of almost the Messiah complex, coming in with a successful coach coming into an underperforming club. So like Clarkson at North Melbourne, Mick Malthouse at Carlton back in the day. Is there this sort of overarching theme that maybe a senior coach comes in, can just fix everything in one go? I think that's always a bit of a concern. And I think Gold Coast have still got a lot of work to do on their list. For one, I think senior players are still an issue, sort of that 27 and above bracket. I think they're lacking in that department, and also just the losing culture, to put it bluntly. I mean, Gold Coast have been in the league now for 14 years, have never made finals, and I think that'll take some time for Hardwick to rectify that. But great to have varying opinions. I think in the long run he'll be a success, but just in terms of this year, 250 or thereabouts for top 8. I think as it stands, we went through Geelong before. I think there are other teams who are better placed to make finals.
No, I think that's definitely well thought through, Tommy, and they've certainly got a lot of talent, but a lot of holes on their list as well. And Damien Hardwick is one of those Messiah type leaders that could make a change, but at the end of the day, that culture comes into it.
Yeah.
Look, Daz, I just wanted to chat to you about Metricon Stadium. I mean, we know that the Gabba is that fortress for Brisbane.
Is it called Metricon now? What's it called? I'll just look that up while you're talking.
We know that Gabba is a fortress for the Brisbane Lions. Can the Gold Coast turn that stadium into a fortress as well?
I think so. I mean, one thing they also have to do is hit the ground running. The last 3 years, they've been 1-4, 2-5, and 1-4. They've been very slow starters to seasons, and they've often built into the year okay and kind of gone 50-50 after that. But they just need to find a way to get some wins early. They got belted by Sydney early last year and lost to Essendon at Docklands, threw away a game against Fremantle in the gather round in Adelaide when they should have won it. But yeah, their record even now at Metricon, or whatever it's called these days, Carrara, by comparison to
Heritage Bank,
by comparison to their away record, is quite significant. They are hard to beat. Last year they had good wins at home against Geelong. They actually beat Brisbane at the Gold Coast last year as well. They beat St Kilda there as well. They flogged Hawthorn by 11 goals. Lost to Melbourne pretty much on the siren. So I think they are building a more competitive base at Carrara.
Hey, Tommy, tell us a little bit about Charlie Ballard. Is someone that you think could have a big year and someone that's underrated in the competition?
Yeah, I think so, Carl. He's 196 centimetre key defender, and I think he's as important to the Suns as any player, as Ben King, Matt Rowell, Noah Anderson. I really do believe that. And I think he can actually contend for an All-Australian Blazer at the end of this year should Gold Coast rise up the ladder. But as that intercept player, and he and Sam Collins form a really good partnership down in the back line for the Suns. And he was rated elite by Champion Data for intercept marks last year. So I think, he's a potential, as I just mentioned, All-Australian candidate.
Well, Tommy, in summarising, I think you've actually convinced me a little bit into the lay for Gold Coast top 8. I think purely at the price, $2.56 is probably under the odds. However, they could make top 8. I think that price is actually a bit too short.
I think, as you mentioned, the start's the key for them. If they win a few games early and maybe get some road wins and some confidence, then the Hardwick factor might kick in and they might break their finals curse, but certainly unders for me.
One thing is for sure, we do want to see them play finals, hopefully soon. Let's talk about the GWS Giants. Obviously started the season slow, came home under some rocket fuel. They were absolutely amazing, and Kingsley's first year as coach was fantastic. They won 13 games, made a preliminary final. Obviously got beaten by Collingwood in that game. Daz, what are you doing with the GWS Giants this season?
Yeah, they were 4-8 last year. Beat Geelong at Kardinia Park, which kick-started their season. But their defence after that halfway point was extraordinary. They conceded 36, 45, 72, 57, 63, 73, 36, 58. And 3 other scores in the 70s. Their only blowout in the second half of the year was against Port Adelaide in round 21 when they gave up 20 goals in that game. But they, along with Carlton, were the form side of the second half of the year. They were probably a goal away from breaking Collingwood in the prelim when they were 17 points up in the third quarter and would have been a very good chance of winning the flag. So, and if you look at who they beat too, Geelong at Kardinia Park, they beat both Adelaide teams in South Australia. They beat Melbourne in Alice Springs, the Bulldogs in Ballarat, St Kilda and Carlton in Melbourne.
Gee, that's a good record.
They had a tremendous back end of the year, and it seemingly came from nowhere because at the start of the year when they lost Taranto and Hopper, having fallen out of the finals, we thought, they've been up for a while, but they're going to struggle now. But what they were able to put together and the evenness across their list, it looks like it's something that's quite repeatable for them, and I expect them to go pretty well.
They were certainly a team that loved getting on the road and playing those away games. Have we got a best and fairest Smoky and potentially a breakout player this year?
Look, obviously, you look at their best players as being potentially the Greens, Toby Green and Tom Green. And you look at Kelly and Canelio as always being in the mix. Canelio had a great year, but Sam Taylor, key defender, finished 8th in the best and fairest and missed 7 games last year. He's a top echelon defender.
I think he's probably, you could argue he's the best fullback in the league.
Yeah, so I think he would be a legitimate chance, despite all that star power in their side, to win a BNF as a key position defender for mine.
Tommy, is $1.40 too short for the top 8?
Well, I think not your man to talk to about GWS, because last year I said they backed them in the least season wins market, and they made a prelim. So, but all jokes aside, I think top 8 locks, complete locks for the top 8 this year, and even money top 4 probably remains to be seen. But I think top 8 $1.40 is very, very good shopping.
Geez, I'll be laying them after that.
It's fair enough.
Those couple of notes. So let's move on to Hawthorn. Obviously, Sam Mitchell's Hawthorn. He had his first season in the head coach's chair last season. He's obviously had some pretty horrific health problems overseas, and usually we talk about disrupted pre-seasons for players. Well,
which they've actually had as well.
Yeah, well. Obviously, some shocking injury issues in some pre-season scratch matches, but I actually think it's quite underrated that Sam Mitchell hasn't been there for the whole pre-season. Obviously, for a young side, he's moulding them. Do you think that's going to be a big issue, Daz?
Yeah, look, I can see the start being tricky for them for those reasons mentioned. I mean, last year they started slowly, and then in the second half of the year beat Collingwood, Brisbane, the Bulldogs, pushed the Giants. Started to play really well and show some good signs. I think we'll see similar. I think it'll be hard for them to build momentum early with injuries and those disruptions, but I anticipate the second half of the year being a lot better for them, and I think we'll see a lot more out of, Josh Weddle, been forecast by some as potentially being the best player in the comp in the next 2 or 3 years. I think he's certainly got the potential to be Hawthorn's best player within a couple of years and maybe elevate into that group, but got a lot of really good young kids. Connor McDonald's a good player, Josh Ward is a good player, and Nick Watson, I think, is who they recruited. Nickname is the Wizard.
Excitement machine.
Yeah. He's I know all of the rising star talk is around Harley Reid, and understandably so, but I think this kid will play round 1 and get a nom in the first month. So I think he's value in that space.
Yeah, that's great insight, Daz. And I'm just having a look at potentially Hawthorn's best 22, and I love their forward line. Obviously, they've acquired Jack Gunston, come back to the club, premiership player. Marbior Chol has come over, and he's obviously been a super consistent player at the Gold Coast, had a couple of big years. Dylan Moore's a great player. Luke Bruce is he can never be underrated because he'll teach you a lesson. And Mitch Lewis obviously had his injury problems, but he's one of the best forwards in the AFL when he's going.
Jack Ginnivan,
yeah. I think Mitch Lewis is. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that Mitch Lewis is the key to Hawthorn's success in 2024. Absolutely. I think he's just the focal point up forward for them, and if he can, as you say, kicks 55 to 70 goals potentially. Hawthorn, they'll win a lot of games this year and excite their fans more. And
it'll also make it a lot easier for players like, another one, Jack Ginnivan, coming over from Collingwood, and he'll fit into that Hawthorn lineup seamlessly. So, Daz, are you going to back Nick Watson for the Rising Star? $16+ on the exchange is pretty good.
I think so. I anticipate he'll get an early nom, which means his 16 will become single digits. So, I don't think he'll be longer than 16 at any other stage of the season. So it's probably now.
All right.
I think just on that as well with Hawthorn's injuries, they're not just to run-of-the-mill players, they're to really key players. So Will Day has missed a whole chunk of pre-season, will miss the start of the year. Dylan Moore, glandular fever. We know glandular fever, it's unpredictable, it's an unknown. So he will miss a chunk of time to start the year. And their fullback, James Blank, I believe is his name. He was very solid actually throughout 2023, and missing your fullback, if any side's missing their fullback, it's not going to bode well. So I think there's 3 names there, and CJ as well, who we all love watching. There's 4 names. They're pretty key losses for the Hawks.
Yeah, I think they've drifted a little bit in that top 8 market. Yep. Currently $6.20 on the Betfair Exchange. Let's talk about the Melbourne Football Club. Another straight sets defeat out of finals there. They lost the 2 in a row. Obviously, they won 16 games last season. They were relatively good across the season. A couple of bad losses, but they said goodbye to a couple of players. Obviously, Luke Dunstan, Brodie Grundy was sort of that failed experiment with Gorney. James Harms was a premiership player with the club, and another premiership player, and probably more of that role depth player, Michael Hibbard-Piggy. James Jordan as well, another role player there, was said goodbye to Sydney. But I'll start off with you, Tommy. What do you think about Melbourne's chances this year?
Tumultuous off-season, that's the best way to describe it. Clayton Oliver dramas with him and into the Joel Smith saga, which is, as we know, is ongoing. But who knows what that can do to the psyche of a club. It can either galvanise you and make you stronger and make you want to probably win more to prove the doubters wrong, or it can go the other way. You know, there can be fractured relationships and the like. So I think it'd be very interesting to watch the D's this season. Jacob Van Rooyen's key, pivotal to the D's this year. He'll be their focal point up forward, and there was a lot of chat in 2023 about the functioning or the functionality of the D's forward line, and with Bailey Fritsch basically being their standout man. Obviously, Tom McDonald and Ben Brown getting towards the end of their careers, probably not contributing at a sort of high level every game these days. So, yeah, JVR, he's a big one, potential best and fairest candidate if the D's can kick on. But, yeah, still the concerns remain for me around their scoring and just what this off-season has done for them.
Have we got a breakout player potentially for the club this year?
I'll throw to Daz for that breakout player.
I like your suggestion on Van Rooyen. 28 goals, costly suspension in the finals as well, on top of all of their other forward line issues. Matthew Jefferson was their first pick the year before as a key position forward. He's looked pretty good at VFL level. I think he should play some games. Caleb Windsor, who they took pick 7, showing some really good signs on the track, so I think he'll play footy pretty early. But yeah, Melbourne are an interesting one. Obviously, Brayshaw, one of the best players on their list, retiring.
How could we forget about
is a huge blow.
Absolutely.
If you look at their top 6, they'd almost had the best star power in the competition, and they lose one of those players. I think what happened to their forward line last year was not an excuse, but a reason. So, I mean, Brown struggled with injury. McDonald struggled. They threw Petty forward. He kicked 6 against Richmond. Then he gets injured. Then Melksham stands up and wins them a game. Then he gets injured. Then Van Rooyen gets suspended. Then they were playing Petrarca forward, thinking, well, he's a match winner. He can solve us for it. Then Brayshaw gets knocked out against Collingwood, so they have to put Petrarca back into the middle. I just think it just kept spiralling for Melbourne, and I think that it's a valid reason why it didn't work for them, and I think they've got some tools in place to win enough games, but it is very difficult to look at their off-season and say, well, you know, that's an ideal lead into a season. But there's enough talent for them to still be pretty competitive if they can overcome that.
That straight sets exit from last year's finals campaign probably sees their top forward price drift a little bit, $3.20 on the exchange. I think that's valued there, Daz. What do you think?
Yeah, look, if I line them up against, I mean, if we look at Collingwood and Brisbane as good chances to finish top 4 and the Giants and Carlton, you then look at where Melbourne fit into that with Port Adelaide and Sydney and teams like that. And I still think Melbourne stack up similarly well to the Giants, Port, Sydney, even Carlton to a degree. So I don't mind the price on them. I'm not saying they're a lock for top 4, but they're certainly a better chance than the price for mine.
All right, well, let's move over to North Melbourne. The D's obviously an exciting prospect, but North Melbourne, another one. Tommy, looking forward to chatting about them. A couple of really exciting additions to the club as well. A few early picks there in Dersma and McKercher. Have I said it right? McKercher?
I think that's correct. Yeah, you got that spot on. So, but yeah, certainly, Carl, another year of building for North this season. Officially now the youngest team in the comp by age and by games played. So you'd say that's a recipe for not many wins in 2024. They'd be hoping for, I'd say, between, 5 and 7 would be considered a good result this year, just given the profile of the list. And the back line has been spoken about at length, is a real concern. There's a lot of names in that back line that are newcomers to the league, and Callan Dawson, Toby Pink, and Biggie Newen from Richmond are three players who will likely feature, and they're really inexperienced at AFL level and will likely leak a lot of goals in 2024. But on the upside, and there is plenty of upside, Nick Larkey, what a sensational player Nick Larkey is, just from a consistency standpoint, and a set shot goal kicking standpoint as well. It's spoken about so much in the modern era around the importance of set shot goal kicking. You look at Harry Mackay on one hand, then you take Nick Larkey. I know who I'm picking just because of the consistency there. So youngsters, Harry Sheasel, George Wardlaw, McKercher, Dersma, Tom Powell. There are a few really good names in there for North, and I think it's also really important to note that Alistair Clarkson, this will be his first full season uninterrupted. Of course, he took the mental health break mid-year last year, which just threw the club completely out of whack. So I think full pre-season, full season under the, I call him new coach. I think we can consider him that, and I think things are on the up, but probably the wins column not so much.
Talk to us about a breakout player and a best and fairest Smoky.
So I've gone George Wardlaw as the breakout player. You could argue that he's broken out already, but I think he's North Melbourne's next big thing, to be honest. Pick 4 from 2022 and has all the tools to be one of the best mids in the competition. The combination of burst from stoppage and his power and his disposal, all those traits line up for him to be an elite mid. So I think he should be ready to go for round 1 and have a great season. And Smoky and the best and fairest, there's not really a Smoky for me. I think it's pretty clear cut. I've gone with Nick Larkey. I think, can you believe he hasn't actually won a best and fairest yet? Kicked 70 goals last year and got pipped by the first year player, Harry Sheasel. So you feel a bit stiff there, but I think Larkey is definitely a good play there. And from a betting strategy standpoint, I think Wardlaw for the Rising Star at $5, probably a touch of unders, to be honest, at the moment. When I wrote the preview, he was $6.40, which was a much better price, but $5 is touch and go. Could still be a solid play, but you'd probably want closer to $5.50. And Colby McKercher, as you mentioned, Carl, racks up touches for fun and will be playing that key running role off the half-back line. So for Supercoach players as well out there, I think he's one for your Supercoach team. But there'd be my 2 plays for the Rising Star.
You've absolutely nailed that, Tommy. Great analysis of the North Melbourne Football Club. It's going to be another year of development for them, but looking forward to see them try to be competitive under Alistair Clarkson. Let's talk about the Port Adelaide Football Club. What are we doing with Port this year, Daz? They're a team that obviously we hope so much for them. I know their president hopes so much for them, but they can't quite get it done and go all the way. So what are you doing with Port Adelaide?
Yeah, it's been interesting. If you look at their Achilles heel last year, they won a lot of close games and went on a great run, but they were ranked 12th defensively despite finishing top 4, and you're not going to win flags with that defensive profile. But bringing in Zerk Thatcher from Essendon and Asava Radaglia from Geelong, I think does help address that. They get Soldo from Richmond, Jordan Sweet from the Bulldogs, both to provide a bit of ruck depth. Neither of them stars, but they'll certainly assist them in that space. Obviously, they lose Xavier Dersma to Essendon, and a couple of veterans retire like Tom Jonas and Scott Lysette and those types of players. But I think Port Adelaide have addressed a weakness. It's just whether they have enough, say, depth through the middle. If you look at, say, the balance of their percentage and the balance of their attack and defence, then you go to their middle. I mean, they'd want Ollie Wines, who's a Brownlow medalist, finished 10th in their best and fairest last year, only missing a game or 2. So he clearly dropped away and was carrying issues throughout a lot of the year. So they can get him up there into the Rosie Butters combination and really get themselves up and running. And Jason Horne-Francis takes another step as a player, then they can hold their ground. I think for Port Adelaide, the ceiling is around about that top 4 spot. Whether they can win a flag, beat teams like Brisbane on the road, Collingwood on the road, remains to be seen. I think they've done enough to their list to be a pretty good side again, but I just wonder whether it's a premiership side for mine.
Just one for both of you guys,
Yeah.
I suppose. Is it a stretch to say that Rosie and Butters are the best 1-2 combination in the league, do you think?
Good question.
Pretty close, yeah.
I think they're up there.
Very just dynamic players, goal kickers, ball-winning players. I think that you could definitely suggest that, I reckon.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's actually a pretty good suggestion. Off the top of my head, I can't see too many. Obviously, you got your Neil and Dunkley, Cripps and Walsh, a couple of others. So yeah, I think they're obviously two fantastic players. The thing that my thoughts on Port Adelaide in terms of their season is they just have to make the top four. They need to get a home final.
Yeah, you're right.
And they have to cash in on that home final.
And they have to cash in on that home final. If they're not doing that, they're probably going to find it pretty hard.
And did they rush, into signing Ken Hingley? Because, they obviously had did they sign him prior to the finals last year? I believe they did, just to show some faith. But if they were to miss the finals this year or get eliminated in straight sets again or exit early, you'd think it seems like a never-ending cycle for Ken. Feel sorry for Ken, but he seemingly always under pressure. So,
yeah, I'm not sure how much contracts are worth these days. I'm sure they would still have no issue with terminating that contract.
Odd season for Port, obviously 2-2, won 13 in a row, lost 4 in a row, then went 3-3, I think, after that. So relatively low percentage due to the amount of close games they won, but Collingwood demonstrated a year earlier that that's not a bad trait to build on, and they might be looking at that as well. But I would have concerns over whether they can hold off the Giants and the Blues, who both finished below them last year.
All right, let's move over to the Richmond Football Club. Obviously have a new coach this year in Adam Uze. He's going to coach out his first full AFL season. Richmond, 10 wins last year, 1 draw. They finished 13th on the ladder, obviously missing finals. Are they going to miss finals again? What are your thoughts, Tommy?
I think it's safe to assume, Carl, they will miss finals again in 2024. So Trent Cotchin, Jack Rewald, Jason Castagna and Robbie Tarrant, all really key members of that footy club, exited at the end of 2023, sort of signalling the end of an era at the Tigers, and they head into 2024 with the equal 4th oldest list and the 8th most experienced in games played. So they're, in a sense, they've got some really good older players, as we mentioned, Dustin Martin, Dion Prestia, these sorts of guys, Dylan Grimes, but there's a real gap between, I suppose, them and their young brigade, who are sort of unproven at AFL level as yet. I think, perhaps the most telling stat of their demise last season was that they dropped from first in points scored in 2022 down to 11th in 2023. And we know what happened to Tom Lynch last season. He was went down early with a foot injury, unfortunately, which cost him the rest of his season. But the reliance on him, I feel, is a bit concerning for a soon-to-be a 32-year-old. And yet again, he's had another interrupted pre-season, and it's questionable whether he features in round 1. So big reliance on him. And in terms of a betting strategy, Carl, I've actually got laying Tom Lynch for the Coleman at up to $15. I believe he's drifted closer to the 20-1 mark in recent days, but missing a huge chunk of footy, limited pre-season. I think he only started running post-Christmas. I think he's worth opposing the current price.
The interesting one there is Jacob Kazitsky, who's going to come into the side, and obviously for Jack Rewalt, he's a talented player and potentially could show Richmond something. Are there any plays for you, Darren? I think Tommy's pretty much nailed it there.
Yeah, I think he has.
Samson Ryan and Josh Gibcus, they're two who I've thrown out as
Gibcus definitely
options for the Tigers. Up and coming players, and just watch on Daniel Rioli as well. I think he's a really underrated player for the Tigers, who'll get a lot of time off halfback, slingshotting off halfback, and he's my pick as a smoky.
We've seen them play both their practice matches too. They looked pretty good against Melbourne last week. Got beaten by Collingwood yesterday at the time of recording, but I think
good for a half.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. They showed bits and pieces in that indicate that they're working on something that's sustainable. Yeah.
Only a few teams left to analyse, and we're going to zoom through here. We got St Kilda, a really interesting one. They've got a fantastic list, I think, and a couple of really handy young players. One of my favourites is Wanganang Millera, and I'm sure he's one of yours as well, Daz.
Yeah, he had a tremendous season. I've got him as a smoky for the best and fairest. As a 19-year-old, he had 563 disposals and finished fourth in the best and fairest, played every game, third for rebound, third for marks. He's probably the best kick of the footy on the list. And I think his form will allow them to play Jack Sinclair a bit further up the ground if they want to do that. And then you throw in Liam Henry and Brad Hill for some of that run and carry. I think that really does help them. So there was a lot of talk last year around Mitch Owens in particular and Marcus Windhager to a lesser degree. But I think Wanganang Millera's season was phenomenal for a second-year player for mine. Riley Bonner, who they got from Port Adelaide, pre-season draft, delisted by Port Adelaide, will be interesting to see where he fits into all of that. Looked good in their first practice hit out against Essendon, so whether he plays early. And St Kilda just trying to overcome some injuries in the early part of the pre-season. Butler, Windhager broke his hand. Ironically, last year, St Kilda played their first practice match against Essendon. Marcus Windhager broke his hand at the first centre bounce. This year they played Essendon in their first practice match at Moorabbin, and Marcus Windhager broke his hand at the first centre bounce. So quite extraordinary. But so he's touch and go for round one. Dan Butler touch and go for round one. Hunter Clark did a calf during the week. But overall, I think they should be close to full strength by round one with a couple out. So.
One player that we didn't touch on or haven't touched on just yet is Fremantle's Liam Henry, who comes over to St Kilda. I think he's quite a talented player, only still young. Played 16 games last year, averaged 20-plus disposals. I think he's a fantastic acquisition, especially on that wing, and he's going to learn from a very, very good player in Brad Hill as well.
Definitely, and obviously probably 7 or 8 years younger than Hill, so he's the heir apparent to take those reins as Hill gets a little bit older in his career. So yeah, he'll be important, and I think for St Kilda it's been that injection of speed. They got beaten by the Giants in the finals last year when the Giants were flying, and their midfield was probably exposed as being a little bit off those best sides. So I think just trying to get a bit more pace in there, and that's again where they're trying to put Jack Sinclair in there, I think, just to give him a little bit more class and a little bit better use by foot to feel that they can use that to bridge the gap on some of those sides above them.
Just wanted to wrap up on the Saints, Carl, from a quick question for me to both of you guys. Max King, what's an acceptable... or how many goals should he be kicking in 2024? Because he's as we know, he's a very hyped player and extremely talented, but maybe to this point in time hasn't quite lived up to the expectation. How many goals, Daz?
Well, I think that's the key. So he's kicked 52 in 2022, then only played 12 games last year and kicked 30. Looked probably better last year. They need him and Membry fit. So if I look at St Kilda, 2022 they were ranked 15th in attack and 7th in defence. Last year, they were still ranked 15th in attack, but were ranked first in defence, which is why they moved up into the 8. If they can get that scoring power even up into the top 10, top 8, top 6, then that's a huge bonus for them. And Max King is clearly the key to that. I think if he's ideally a 3-goal a game player, so mid-60s, I think would be an enormous asset for the Saints.
Yeah, I think you're pretty spot on. Nothing to add there. Daz, I will say that Mitch Owens is a very exciting player as well, and he had a fantastic year last year. What was it, Daz? To Champion Data, he was potentially one of the picks for the Brownlow medal, which is crazy considering it's just Mitch Owens. He's no, I suppose, A-list. He's not walking down the red carpet, very quiet, so an underrated...
He wouldn't have got an invite to the Brownlow.
He might be this year or in the coming years. So
Exactly. So just quickly... on a betting strategy, $3 around $3.10 looks like value for top 8 for St Kilda.
Yeah, just by comparison, similar to what we're talking about with Essendon. Dogs 222, Geelong 208, Gold Coast 264. I'm not sure St Kilda should be a longer price than those 3 sides for the 8.
Okay, cool. Well, let's talk about the Sydney Swans now. 12 wins last season. Another one similar to Carlton and GWS. Were very slow to start, but stormed home, made finals. Lost to Carlton in that amazing elimination finals where Blake Acres was the hero. Again, kicked one of those game-confirming goals at the end of the game. But the Sydney Swans, what do we do with them? They've lost a couple of players, but picked up Taylor Adams, James Jordan, and also Brodie Grundy, which I think is going to be a big one. Has anyone got any breakout players that they're looking forward to seeing?
just start with a quick one on the Swans. So last year, there's many different points of view, but I think one thing that probably gets overlooked is that they were actually quite lucky in a sense to make finals, because Siren Gate against the Crows at the Adelaide Oval was one, and also if you cast your mind back to the North game at Marvel, when the umpire infringement, interchange infringement, essentially gifted them that game. So if you remove those two wins, they wouldn't have made finals, and would we be speaking about Sydney in such a fond way, I suppose? But no doubt, Daz, they've got plenty of talent across all lines, really, and those two additions will be very handy.
Yeah, the recruits suit them. Grundy on a small ground. Sydney haven't had, they've had solid ruckman, but haven't had an elite ruckman for a while. Taylor Adams certainly will enjoy playing in that midfield. Joel Hamling, an underrated pickup as a free agent from Freo.
Yeah, great.
And James Jordan, sub in Melbourne's premiership. So I think all four of those guys make them better. And then you combine that with like Goulden and McInerney and Logan McDonald and the good young talent they already have. They should expect to be better.
Goulden's I think he's a big chance for the Brownlow. I mean, he polled really well last year. Was it top 3? He finished.
Almost won it.
Yeah, definitely top 3. He's a dead set star, and I think he's one for the Brownlow.
Well, they're not without their injury problems like a couple of other AFL teams. Obviously, Luke Parker just recently has injured himself, as well as a couple of others. One thing I'll say about Sydney is I'm very excited about their forward line post Buddy Franklin. I think Logan McDonald's going to become a fantastic AFL player. He owns that forward line now, with Hayden McLean probably coming in behind him. And Hayden McLean was by far the best big man.
Took 10 contestant marks against Carlton in the elimination
in that
final.
elimination final.
So the other one's young Amati.
Yeah.
Will be an all right player.
Amati. So with Tom Papley, Will Hayward obviously, and Isaac Heaney going up there, and Chad Warner going through the half forward line as well into the midfield. Yeah, I think Sydney's forward line is really exciting. Joel Hamling obviously caters for their needs to have another big, tall defensive player in their back line. Tom McCartan just keeps on trying his absolute hardest against the big gorillas. Joel Hamling will help him out there, but probably a bit of an issue with depth. I see the Swans in terms of top 8, top 4 markets pretty on the money. I don't think there's any value there. I definitely thought that there was value in Logan McDonald for the Coleman medal at $50+. I had something on it about $55. I think those odds have come in significantly. He only needs a couple of big bags to put him into single figures. So, yeah, Logan McDonald, one that I'm keeping an eye on for the Coleman medal. The final, we've got 2 more previews now. We're going to talk about last year's Wooden Spooners. Almost gave away the number 1 pick in Harley Reid there, but the West Coast Eagles had 3 wins last season. What do we make of them, Tommy?
We'll try our best to put a positive spin on what is likely to be a long season for the West Coast Eagles in 2024. Something like 30 back and front page articles on number 1 pick Harley Reid in the off-season. Hasn't played a game yet, as we know, so pending his ability, but just the hype surrounding him, very exciting for West Coast fans and the league in general. I think it's always good when we can appreciate the young talent in the league and sort of hype them up. I suppose in a way, I know we don't like Americanizing our game too much, but similar to what they do with NBA draft prospects. So very exciting. Harley Reid. Ruben Ginby's one, who I think went underlooked in 2023. He played 17 matches and was ranked above average in handballs, average in clearances, and what was particularly, I suppose, outstanding from him was his level of tackling. He was ranked elite by Champion Data, 5.9 tackles per game. And yeah, just an impressive, I suppose, specimen. He's a big boy, sort of 190 centimetres, the modern midfielder, if you like. And so, yeah, there are some positives from a youngster's standpoint, but I think the depth of their list is a real concern, and probably hard to see them winning more than, I don't know, 2-3 games. What do you reckon, Dave?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they showed a little bit in the second half of the year. Obviously, the win over the Bulldogs late, competitive against Essendon. Obviously, they had that one stinker in the second half when Fremantle smashed them in the second derby by 101 points. But on the most part, after that Sydney debacle, they were more competitive with a couple of wins at home and narrowing the margins from, say, 15-goal losses to 7 or 8-goal losses. But they're clearly a long way off the pace. I mean, the era officially over with Shuey and Natanui and Hearn and those guys retiring. There's not a lot of obvious, young talent by comparison to, say, North Melbourne or Hawthorn or any of those sides coming through. Obviously, Harley Reid the exception, but I think they're only just at the start of their road back, so it's going to be a slow old road for them. And side note, it's a shame they delisted Greg Clark because he's got a name straight out of the 1980s. So it'd be great to have someone like that in the competition.
Yeah, that's a good shout. The least season wins 270. I couldn't quite believe this price of 270 on the Betfair Exchange. Least season wins market, I think. Yeah, we've touched on it. We don't want to bash them too much, Carl. That's not what this show's about. But I think, worst side on paper in the competition, home ground advantage, minimal at best. Only won 2 games at Optus last season, and probably won't be that much different this year. So
I mean, it was 2 of only 3 games.
Wins, yeah, exactly.
At the halfway point of the year, they had the worst percentage of any side at the halfway point of the year since the 1960s. So that puts it in perspective as to how much they were struggling.
First team since, I think it was 2011 to concede 200 points to an opposition team. Mm-hmm. So, year of growth for the Eagles. That's pretty much all that needs to be said.
All right, well, let's leave the West Coast Eagles there and move on to the Western Bulldogs. Another interesting team to dissect here. They had 12 wins last season. What do we make of the West Coast Eagles, Daz? The Western Bulldogs, Daz?
Yeah, a couple of bad losses cost them dearly late in the year. Lost to Hawthorn in Tassie and then West Coast at Marvel. Started the year poorly, got on a bit of a run, and then were just patchy in the second half of the year. They've unfortunately lost Bailey Smith for the ACL. Which is a big blow to their midfield group at this early stage. In terms of recruits, Nick Caulfield coming in from the Saints. James Harms is a pretty good pickup from Melbourne. Bruce retired, obviously on the back of 2 ACLs, but their list doesn't change enormously apart from that. So it's really what happens with their key position stocks. So does Aaron Norton get enough support from when Ugle-Hagan looks like he'll be a Jet? Does Darcy play more football? Is it back or forward? Can Rory Lobb be a more consistent performer for them? And can Tim English back up his excellent season in the ruck? So I think for the Bulldogs, they've got enough run and carry and enough skill around the ball, even with Bailey Smith out. But can they get enough depth in their key position stocks to compete?
I think it's a huge year for the Western Bulldogs footy club. I think, they on paper should be winning. They should be winning the premiership with the amount of depth they have. Their key position players, Darcy, Ugle-Hagan, Norton, and Rory Lobb, to just cherry pick from in your forward line. I just think that's an incredible. Some clubs do things for that amount of talent in their forward line. So I think certainly the Dogs are under the microscope in 2024, and Luke Beveridge particularly. It'd be interesting to see how they go.
So you bring up an interesting point, Tommy, and Daz also touched on it before. A question, and I'll give this one to you, Daz. So I'm a big believer of you don't play your 22 best players on the field, you play your best 22 as a team. And I actually think that the ACL injury of Bailey Smith offers the Western Bulldogs an opportunity to make sure that they handpick a player for that position as opposed to just using Bailey Smith because he's one of the most talented players in the football club. On your point, Tommy, I think they do have a lot of forward line talent, but that's a lot of tall timber to put into 6 positions. And obviously with the way that the game is being played now, it's very, very important that you get a good versatility in your forward line with smalls and talls. So for me, the question, Daz, to you is, does the injury to Bailey Smith potentially provide an opportunity for another player?
I think so. I mean, if there has been a criticism of the Dogs too, it's that they change the way they play too often. They change their structure, their style. And, losing someone like Bailey Smith, you would hope that they would look at it and hand pick and figure out what their best style is, what their best 22 looks like. And actually, that old, Alistair Clarkson used to use the mantra, the one soldier down, one soldier up mentality, that it's more about what you're trying to do rather than who it is that's trying to do it. But I agree with what Tommy said. They're an enigma. On face value, they have enough talent to play finals. But, look, I look at their list and not much has changed from 2023 to 2024. It's effectively the same team. They were good enough last year and didn't necessarily deliver. What happens this time? It's hard to trust them, but at the same time, you have to respect what they have, and basically just basically see if they deliver on that promise.
Quick mention to Riley Sanders, first-year player. Raps on him. Big. He's dominated in pre-season. He'll start in the middle for the Dogs in round one. So from a rising star standpoint, we don't have him as a suggested bet, but certainly he's one to watch out for.
Let's talk about final predictions for the Western Bulldogs. Anyone having any bets on the exchange?
Tiny bit too short for the 8. Can make it, but again, don't like the price comparison.
And nothing to add from me.
I think that the Coleman Medal winner currently plays for the Western Bulldogs. I think his name is Jamara Ugle-Hagan. At $38, $42 I've taken early in the exchange markets. Way too long, considering he is by far now the Western Bulldogs' main man up forward. I think they've looked past Norton a little bit purely because of his kicking issues. I reckon they're going to push him up the ground, and Jamara Ugle-Hagan is going to be that full forward one-on-one player that they're going to isolate. I think he's just absolutely fantastic. With another preseason under his belt, injury-free, he's going to get fitter. He is your Coleman Medal winner. I think $36 is a very, very good price currently.
Clip that one up, team, for the social media.
But that's the Western Bulldogs. That's all 18 AFL clubs. It's been an absolute pleasure delivering these tips and predictions for the 2024 AFL season. Looking forward to a big season. We've got trade talk. We've got expert tips of every single game. Joel Williams is going to do some late mail content for us. So plenty happening on the Betfair Hub for the AFL season. But we will see you. Thanks for watching the AFL season previews.
What are you really gambling with? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.